Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the first submission by Russell of his horse JC. This is a photograph of the horse that's 15 years old when they bought the horse, which is a couple of years ago. His daughter tried to ride it and it just became too difficult, wasn't trained enough, had a lot of problems, and they were going to get rid of the horse. And Russell decided to try and train it himself, watching our videos, having never trained a horse before, or ridden before, I must say. And the transformation that he's made by sticking to the program and not listening to the various people around him telling him that he didn't know what he was doing has been pretty miraculous. And once again, when you bring up that, it's the horses that tell you whether you're doing this work correctly or not. I mean, humans are just full of opinions, but the horses will tell you the truth. And when you see a horse that looked like this one turn into what it's now looking like, it's pretty much an undisputable truth. So when horses are in my opinion, there are no bad horses. Let's look at it that way. They're just simply bad trained horses and horses that have been handled by people who didn't know what they were doing and didn't know how to present a methodical learning experience for the horse so that they could learn it without tension and without fear and without physical pressure. So Russell has done a wonderful job of this, just watching the videos. And this is just wonderful because it's exactly what I intended for my videos. And I go on Facebook now and I see all these people working by themselves and they're doing so much better job than so many of the so-called professional trainers in the world today. And I want to point it out again, if you haven't all heard me say this, I did not invent any of this. Everything that I'm telling you has been done before by riders and greater minds than my own, who worked this all out hundreds of years ago. I just simply went back and found the few living people who knew how to do it. I was fortunate enough to have a father who knew how to do this, who started me riding right. And then I went away to college and started riding for a professional show jumper. And, it was the first time I'd experienced the whole thing of beating up horses and this kind of things that I came to sicken me. And I quit doing it before too long and begin my search for a better way, which of course I ended up finding out was the way my father had taught me to ride to begin with. I just, like many people, even Mr. Oliveira, didn't have a very good way of expressing this. My father would simply tell me that, every great horseman knew the same thing, and if I could figure out what that was, that I would be golden. But he didn't really tell me, nor did Nuno. Nuno would look at you and say, make the horse round like a ball, but he never would really explain what that meant. And if you tried to get him to go into further detail, he would, you weren't going to get very far. So once again, and there's nothing wrong when we talk about what's going on in competition today. We've got to remember how far it started going bad, because Mr. Oliveira in Portugal and Egon von Neindorf in Germany were the two top riders in the world, and they walked away from the sport back in the late 50s because they were both fed up with the direction that they saw it going. Much as Michael Matz in Jumper, the great jumper rider here, probably one of the better that we ever produced here in America, he walked away from it saying the same thing. He did not like the direction it was going. But those of us who don't want to just walk away and give up, I think happily now the scientific research that's coming out today is everything that's coming out is proving these theories, which aren't theories. The way we're going about training horses here was the way it was done by people who knew how to train horses for many years before I ever came along, or even before Mr. Oliveira came along. The greatest minds in the world worked on how to train horses. And the first time I saw people really working like this and really doing a lot of the stretching was when I went to the Cadre-Noir in France, which is, of course, where our great Jacques Le Goff came from, the person who was really the father of three-day eventing here in this country, who sadly we lost as a coach because we had riders who wanted to take the shortcuts. And so we lost the greatest coach in the world, and our team really suffered for it, as did so many other horses. But what we see here with Russell and JC is just a wonderful example of how correct training does not take force. It does not take anything but a little bit of patience and a little bit of knowledge. And you can get a long, long way. And what Russell has discovered here, as we'll see when he gets into the riding part, is when you get a horse working over its back, it's pretty easy to learn how to ride on them because you actually have a stable platform from which to learn. So he's done a wonderful job. Now this isn't early in the training when he just has the horse stretching in just a halter or a cavesson. He's done a wonderful job getting the horse to be stretch and active, and we see what this horse looks like now compared to what it looked like when they bought the horse. I mean, you can just imagine if that's what the horse looked like, how could they, now that you know, Russell, what a horse should look like and what a back top line looks like, you'd never buy another one like that. Because a horse that looks like the one that, as this one did when you bought it, there was no way it could possibly be a well-trained horse because of the muscling. And once you all understand this, You know, I see it so often today. I see people on $1 million horses, and while the neck looks kind of impressive, and you look what's behind the saddle, and there's a big hole, and the hips are sticking out, and there's a hunter's bump, which is actually the beginning of kissing spine and all the other terrible ailments that we see that horses become afflicted with when they're forced into training, and overworked being one of the biggest optimal problems that we have. But this is absolutely wonderful what Russell has done here, and doing nothing but following our examples and everyone's examples. And I want to tell Russell as well, please be sure and join the Art to Ride Friends and Family on Facebook, because I think you'll find a lot of people on there who would commiserate with you and help you move forward. You know, they're all going through the same things, people telling them they don't know how to ride and this is all wrong. And yet look at what the horses are doing. Look how beautifully your horse is transforming. So the horses speak the truth. They can do nothing else. And once you begin to understand what it looks like when you see a horse that's been correctly trained, you won't be fooled by these so-called trainers anymore. When you see their horses and they're upside down and sway back and have kissing spine and broken in the neck, hopefully you'll begin to walk away from them. Hopefully everyone else will. And hopefully some of them will realize that they're on the wrong track and actually start again, which is essentially what I had to do. I rode under these terrible trainers. I tried to figure out what dressage was because I was a 3-day event rider. But I noticed right away that the kind of dressage that we were doing, the first thing I noticed was it was ruining the horse's ability to jump. And if that's what's happening, that should be your first indication that the dressage you're doing is on the wrong track. And of course, that was of the typical type that we see often today of just trying to force the head down with whatever means possible, and thinking that that's round. Once again, I see so many people using these words round. They all have the words, but look at their horses. If their horses are sway back and drop, or they're even just dropped in the back, the beginning of being sway back, if they don't come through from behind, if they're out of rhythm between the front and back end, they're not round, no matter what the people tell you. I recently looked at one of these online learning sites that charged quite a bit of money, and I went through many of their videos and could not find a single correctly trained horse in any of them by any of these so-called top trainers that they're so-called a clearinghouse for. So beware of that. Fancy names mean nothing. The show world today means absolutely nothing. It's completely fallen apart. There's very few trainers in it left that are doing anything more than, you know, swapping horses from one to another, you know, constantly trading horses. Very few of them are actually making any horses. And these are the things that you really need to look at when you're deciding to train with a trainer. As I always say, look behind the ribbons. How did he train the horse, or she train the horse that they won the ribbons on? How long have they trained the horse? How long have they owned the horse? Did they start the horse? What is the muscling of the horse like? These kinds of things. And when you find out with so many of these top trainers that their horses have only lasted a year or two, well, that should be your first indication. I mean, imagine going to one of those kind of trainers with the kind of horse that we saw in the beginning of this video. I mean, you certainly would not get very far. Most of them would just tell you that you were wasting your time and that you needed to buy another horse, which is usually the answer to all of their so-called problems. You know, that's a pretty easy answer, just to tell people buy another one. But there are very few horses that can't be trained. If a horse is sound, and even a lot of them that seem to be unsound are actually nothing but bridle unsound. So, you know, once again, they're so out of sync with themselves that they look like they're lame. That's what we call a bridle lameness. So if we can get a horse working over its back and all of a sudden it goes sound, or seems to be even, then we know there really was nothing wrong with the horse other than the fact that it was just, you know, holding its body in such a posture that it couldn't allow itself to actually, the two sides of the horse couldn't be, or the diagonal pairs in the trot could not be in sync with one another. Which is always the true. Remember, we're always talking about the rhythm of the horse, and always remember that the rhythm means the rhythm between the front and back end, not the speed at which the horse moves around. Now look how beautifully this horse is stretching into the contact here. Now we've moved a little while later, and look how this horse has developed. The hole behind the saddle is almost gone. The horse has put on a lot of weight. Swinging beautifully, stretching into the contact, exactly what it should be doing. And notice that Russell has bought himself some boots and breeches here. A great job he's done with this horse. I just think this is fantastic. My goal is to go to a horse show someday, or wherever I go, and just see everyone working like this. See happy horses and people really getting back to enjoying riding again, which is one of the more optimal things to think about, in the sense of, you know, are you enjoying it? I see so many people, especially sadly dressage riders, who don't seem to be enjoying it at all. They're in terrible pain. Their horses are constantly resistive. They're constantly fighting. That isn't at all what dressage is about. This is what dressage is about: developing a horse, taking a horse like this. And no one who hasn't taken a horse like this and brought it along and watched it develop over time really should ever call themselves a trainer. And that's why I highly recommend And with all of my associate trainers I work with, I have them working with all kinds of horses, not just the perfect ones that were trained by somebody else. In my day, and I still consider this to be the same thing. Dressage is an art. And there's no art to buying somebody else's painting, for instance, putting on your wall and telling people that you painted it. Well, you'd be a fraud. And that's what really dressage is about. You should be about working the level that you can work a horse. And you're doing a wonderful job here, Russell. You're doing a better job working this horse at this level than many Grand Prix riders are today working their horses at that level. And a lot of them wouldn't even know how to work a horse at this level. So you're really on the right track, and once again just proves how if we just give horses a chance, how they come around and relax, like you're seeing this one. Look at the difference in this horse's neck. The muscling has all come over the back. Nicely balanced in the canter, in the stretch as well. And Russell learned and was patient enough to, when you see horses like we saw in the first pictures of this horse, like many of the horses that you folks own out there in the world, and like many of them that badly trained, they're really rehab projects. They're not, things that you can just start and go with, because we have to take our time and get them working over the backs. Now, we have to do that with any young horse at all, but as I've tried to show you with some of the young ones that you've seen me do, how quickly they come around if they haven't been damaged by humans before we start working them. I mean, a good trainer would really rather go out and find a horse that's barely halter broke. I mean, it takes me no time at all to take a horse that knows absolutely nothing and bring it to the level that this horse is. It's just a matter of letting them do it, getting out of the way while they find their way on the ground, which is what you've done a wonderful job of here, Russell. This is really good work. Look how beautifully he's swinging over his back. And Russell waited the amount of time. That's it. Most of these kind of rehab horses, and if they've been broken in the neck and they're sway backed, well, it's going to take 1 year to 2 years to correct these problems. It takes 2 years to put a foundation on a horse that doesn't have problems. And that's the beauty and how amazing it is, really, when you start to work like this and you see how even horses that, start out in very bad physical condition, as this one looked like he was doing, how quickly they come around too. It doesn't take that much longer if you stay on top of it. But it always takes 1 to 2 years for a horse to go through that first working period of its life. If it's a young horse too, it has to finish growing, but then the physical change that happens from the horse stretching through its neck and pulling the withers up through its shoulders, which will give every horse in the world. And then as it develops top line, you really get the sense of the horse really is built uphill. So built uphill is not something that's just conformation. Too bad today, people are building them. They are breeding horses to look like they're already trained, but these horses are no more in physical shape, to do upper level movements than any other horse. And this one, they take the same amount of time, or they fall apart, which is what we see happening all the time in dressage today. But this is really wonderful what Russell is doing here. Russell, everything you're doing, you haven't put a foot wrong, as I like to say about the horses here since. You've kept your posture up straight. You've kept contact with the horse in the stretch. You've kept yourself at the right position in the lunging. This is pretty perfect work in a sense. So really great job. Now, the one thing I would tell you not to do that you just did was you dropped that line on the ground right behind the horse and around your feet. Now, that's one thing that you don't ever want to do, because if something would go wrong, the horse could take off and your foot could become wrapped in that. So we never drop the whip or the line on the ground like that, just for your own safety. And very often, the worst accidents that happen are when people think their horses are calm, because there's not a horse in the world that won't spook at something. If one of those trees falls down or whatever the case may be, there's not a horse in the world that doesn't have something that might spook it. So if that line were on the ground there under your feet and the horse suddenly bolted off, you could find yourself in big trouble being drugged. And I have been drugged once in my life, and I can tell you it's not something that you want to experience. Now, I was happily walked away from it, as I was lucky enough to walk away from quite a few horse accidents in my youth. But for some reason, I've never had a horse flip on me or any of these kinds of terrible accidents that happen to people. When I was drugged, it's because a young horse fell over with me, and I was riding in a Portuguese dressage saddle that had no quickly reached stirrups, and my foot had gone through the stirrup, and the horse jumped up and took off. But fortunately, it was a rotten stirrup leather, and as my leg got caught in something else as the horse was galloping around the ring, the leather popped. So ever since then, actually, I've been very superstitious about buying new stirrup leathers. I will ride them until they're literally falling apart. But what great work here, Russell, you're doing here. This is just all very good. The shambone, I think you could probably begin to even work this horse without even the shambone on, because he looks like he's starting to get to that point where he'd probably do this stretch without it. So maybe in your next one, try that, or the next time after you see this video, see what happens when you just don't use anything at all, and see if he'll stretch down in the same way. But this is very good. Once again, you're doing just the right thing. Your posture's good. The horse is at the end of the line. You're keeping your whip up towards the horse. So the only thing we've seen you do wrong so far today is just drop that line right beside the horse on the ground. So the worst accidents usually happen when we become complacent and we think we know a horse and we know what they're going to do. And once again, it's not that we don't trust the horse. It's just like cars when I drive them. I don't trust the equipment or what's around me. So I'm always keeping myself attuned to what's going on around me, whether I'm riding a horse or driving a car, and what the horse is doing and what the car is doing. A really good stretch in the canter here. Once again, the horse is staying over its top line absolutely beautifully. And this was really wonderful that you just waited a while and sent this in, so we're getting to see all of your work. And you've been a very brave man to stand up to all the naysayers who, wherever you have horse people, and I know you have a lot of them in Australia, everybody thinks whatever they've been doing is the way to do it. But if they haven't really studied riding and really gone into, also realizing when I say study, to realize that everything has been tried with horses. And once again, what I'm teaching you here is nothing new. This was started hundreds of years ago by people who are greater minds than my own, who figured all this out and had the time. Once again, back when the whole world ran on horseback, every country in the world had a university like the Spanish riding school, Mafra in Portugal, the Cadre Noir in France, where they studied riding, and they also considered it a great character building thing if you learn to ride correctly. And you've all heard me say this before, but that's one of my biggest objections to the whole show ring mentality, is we're really cheating these young people that are riding. They're getting these inflated egos, for being handed ribbons on made horses. They're never really learning how to ride, and they're cheating themselves from the experience of really understanding what it could be like to really work with a horse. And that's what makes riding interesting, As a child, for me, I became very bored with going trail riding very quickly and wanted to do more with my horses than just, use them as something to sit on while I looked at the scenery. I've always wanted to get closer in contact with the horse, and I've always been very interested in developing them physically. And have done so for racing and for racing over fences and for 3-day eventing and for dressage and for jumping, and as well as for fox hunting. And what I came to the conclusion was that it's all the same. And once you look and closer at the people that are around you, even in racing and things like this, you'll see how the good trainers train their horses to run over their backs, and the bad trainers have their horses head up in the air and they're pulling with their shoulders down the racetrack. That's the difference between whether a horse ends up being a great racehorse or not. So many horses at the racetrack, for instance, are ruined by trainers who don't know what they're doing, who don't understand how horses need to move when they work. Now, this is also wonderful. Now, here Russell has obviously studied the work in hand, and he's done a wonderful job here. He's doing this pretty much picture perfect. And I point out again, once again, that Russell has only studied our videos. He's had no other riding instruction, and he's just done a wonderful job here as he's figured all this out. I like how you're staying up straight there, that being the big thing. You're keeping the neck straight, just as you should. It's a little bit too bent right there, a little bit. So we'd like to take a little contact outside and loosen the inside rein. And the step could maybe be a little more active, but this is very, very good work. For someone just doing this for the first time, that's excellent. And how lovely and calm the horse stayed throughout it all. Remember, what we're doing here with this work in hand is basically teaching the horse to get off of the leg. We're basically teaching him the skill that it needs once we get up there, because without the ability to do lateral work, it's very difficult to get control over the frame. So you see, watch how this horse's inside hind leg steps under the body. When it does that, when it pushes off the leg, it pushes the back up. That's why the lateral work is so important to this style of work. Really nicely done here. The step could be a little more active, or you even get a little more active there, but this way is really good. You don't have the neck too far bent to the inside. Right there, it comes a little bit out of line with the rest of the spine, but you're really doing a great job of this. The only thing I'd say, I'd like to see it step just a little more actively in it once you get it. Don't try to have too wide an angle, but get a little more active step so we have the same kind of step that we would have if you're riding. But all this work has been absolutely fantastic. For somebody who's taken this up and just studied what we've been doing and figured it out for himself, It also makes me feel very, very good. I know this is one horse that we've is now experiencing a new life and will have a whole new life because of it. And you can just imagine this horse in the condition that it was in before Russell started this work, when they were considering getting rid of it or doing something with it because it wasn't rideable for their daughter. But now I'm sure it would become rideable for the daughter. We've done a wonderful job of bringing this horse along and making it into something, which we can do with any sound horse. So really good work here. You're doing just the right thing of getting on and starting at the right place, which is in the walk. Now maybe in the next video I'd like to see you maybe beginning to try to get rid of the shambone and see what happens there. Try that, but of course if you have a problem, you just take a step back. In other words, we never try to fight our way through the wall if you run into a difficulty and you can't keep the horse stretching any longer, because once again you are learning at the same time. But you've done such a good job, and it also proves the point when you see him beginning to rise the trot here, to see how nicely balanced he already is because the horse is working over its back. It makes it easy to learn to ride. Remember that when you ride horses that are hollow in the back, you end up having to post against the stirrup to get out of the saddle in a rising trot because there's no thrust through the back. So if a horse is working over its back, which is how people knew this in days gone by, because they actually had to ride horses for long distances. And so if you didn't keep them over the back, you wouldn't make it a long distance. My father's famous line to me whenever he saw a saddlebred, he would say, "Oh, they'd never make it to the next town riding that thing," because he knew the wheels would fall off. Now look how beautifully the top line is, the neck, all the right muscles are lit up with this horse. Now I would like to see your position, just one little thing is you could flatten your shoulder blades into your back a little, try not to be rounded forward. The other thing I would do, just as a point, is to tuck your shirt in when you ride so that you're not sitting. If you have a long t-shirt the way you're sitting on there, or any kind of sweatshirt or something, you can end up sitting on that under the saddle, and that could become problematic. So, and it also is better for the teacher to be able to see what your waistline is doing. So it's a good idea to, at least for the videos, tuck your pants in. If you find that if you find yourself feeling a little funny there, it may be that you're sitting on your shirt and it makes it difficult to ride to the horse. So do think about that a little bit. Good leg yield here. And started to slow a little bit, but you got him right back into a really nice rhythm as you did that, and that was very good. And also look at the use of the grass ring, or the grass field for a ring. Once again, if a horse is working over its back, you can work in all kinds of undulated footing. And now you wouldn't want to do extreme lengthenings or something like that if I don't know the footing. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean you can't. In a regular working trot, you should be able to go through just about anything, whether it's mud. And I think about the kind of property that we went through when we'd be fox hunting. You never knew what was coming, and you had to be ready for those things. And if your horse wasn't working over his back, I guarantee you're going to be in trouble out there the first time you step in a hole or something like that. And that's the point of getting horses to work like this over their backs. And most of the dressage horses we see today, if they were not, even in this field, they'd be falling on their heads. A, because they're so hollow and stumbling around. If they get in on anything but perfect footing, they're not going to look very good. Or they may, in fact, be dangerous, as we've seen, and some people getting hurt here in recent years. A hollow-backed horse is always on the verge of falling. That's the thing you have to remember. They're out of balance. And my number one rule of thumb in everything that I've ever done, I've been able to keep my students and myself safe for many, many years, that I never ride a horse out of balance in any way. If I feel it getting out of balance, I'm going to immediately try to get it back into balance and find the right position for it. Because that's when people get hurt, when horses get out of balance. For instance, they take jumps, they land in the jumps and flip over on the people, especially if they're being held up by the hand. And that's always the thing you have to remember. If a horse ever starts to fall with you, you have to open your hands. That's why we always ride with the weight of the rein. And you should always, if you feel the horse suddenly start to stumble, if he pulls on the rein, let the rein go. Don't jerk against his mouth, because if you jerk against his mouth, you'll bring the horse right down on top of you. So a good rider is always ready to slip the reins at any moment. If you feel the horse starting to fall, just stretch up a little bit and just give your hands and just sit there and be quiet and let the horse regain its composure. I literally have had horses fall down all the way to their bellies with me and get back up. If you want to see a good example of that, go on YouTube, and there's a wonderful video of Bill Steinkraus, one of our greatest riders, and it's too bad that he's not the FEI president anymore, because I think if he was, I doubt very seriously we would have the mess that we have in the FEI at the moment, as our president is some princess so-and-so, who I'm sure is, once again, these organizations are being now led for the, and they almost exist for the pure glorification of a handful of people. The same thing could be said of true of the USDF anymore. People have used it for their own personal gain and have forgotten what it was all about. We started all these horse organizations, had their origins in protecting the horses, not just collecting, show scores. And if you don't start by protecting them with the training itself, all the stuff about worrying about people drugging horses, I mean, the reality is I'd rather have somebody drug a horse to ride it than to beat it up, in that sort of sense. If you think of it that way, I wouldn't really like to see either of those things, but you get the idea. Really good stretch in this trot, and look how wonderfully he's doing. And once again, Russell has taught himself all of this all by himself by just watching people that actually are riding correctly. And look what a beautiful job he's doing. Of course, the wonderful thing about the classical system is it not only trains the horse, it trains you as well, because we're not holding on to the mouth of the horse, so you have to develop balance or you will fall off. Now, obviously, Russell has come that far along. His balance has come along beautifully, because he didn't get on this horse until it was starting to work over its back and swing a little bit, which would have made it very easy for him. And now he's able to move right along. He's doing a really great job. Now you can only imagine what his riding might have been like had he not, you can see how easy this horse is going. It has rhythm. It's easy to ride horses that have rhythm. And also remember, once again, when I say rhythm, I mean rhythm between the front and back end. So many dressage horses today are completely out of rhythm between their front and back ends. They're not even communicating with each other. The front legs are being thrown out forward and the back legs are hanging out behind someplace. So here we see this horse working in this undulating grass field. It's probably, like all grass fields, got to have a few irregularities in it here. We haven't seen him trip. He's been able to just power right on along without any problems whatsoever. And what a great job Russell has done here of teaching himself how to stay in balance by just those simple principles of don't hang on the mouth of the horse. So this classical system teaches not only the horse but the rider. If you're balancing against the mouth of the horse, and every rider who is pulling, when you see these teachers that are telling you should have 10 pounds in each hand or 5 pounds in your hand, it's complete nonsense. If you have 5 or 10 pounds in your hand, you're balancing against the mouth of the horse, which means the horse is not in balance and neither are you. Really great work here, just letting the horse come back to the walk and coming back to this beautiful stretch. Basically good position. The only thing I would tell you is I'd like to see you flatten your shoulder blades into your back just a little bit and not let your shoulders round forward when you take contact with the reins. But other than that, that's a small thing. Kind of see what I'm talking about there, how you're kind of sitting on that shirt tail behind a little bit. So you can get kind of caught up and that can actually interfere with your rising trot. But really great job here. It's been so much fun to see everybody on the Friends and Fans site, people all over the world figuring this out for themselves, stepping away from abusive trainers and just realizing that, if you can walk, trot, and canter reasonably well, or even the case of Russell here, who didn't know how to ride, if he got his horse trained and then he was able to learn how to ride on it because he created a horse that was easy to ride, that had good rhythm, working over its back, and when you have one of those, it's easy to learn how to ride. So if you just wait, and of course that being the biggest optimal thing is he had the patience to wait for the horse to develop on the lunge line, to develop these principles that we talk about. And then he was able to step on and begin riding, and what a wonderful job he's done. So I highly recommend everybody, once again, Russell, be sure and join the online site at Facebook, the Friends and Fans of Art to Ride. And that was absolutely a wonderful job that you did here. Look how completely calm and relaxed this horse has been throughout. And of course, I love this as he gives the horse a treat here, and that's exactly what you should do, folks. There has to be something in this for them, and it goes a long way. Giving a horse a piece of sugar. My father gave them sugar. Nuno Oliveira gave them sugar. At the end of the ride, they always got a sugar cube. So there's a little something in it for them rather than just a pat on the neck. Will Faerber here. That's great job.